A quiet night, a small roadside diner in Granger, Mississippi, and an unexpected storm brewing inside when a group of dangerous men walk in, demanding more than just food. The tension becomes unbearable. But what happens when the wrong people try to intimidate the wrong man? Watch as a simple meal turns into an unforgettable showdown that no one saw coming. Don't miss this intense story. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to see more powerful stories like this. Let us know in the comments, what would you do in this situation? The rain fell in steady sheets over the quiet town of Granger, Mississippi, a place that hadn't changed much in 30 years. Street lamps flickered with age, power lines sagged under the weight of drizzle, and neon signs buzzed over storefronts that closed early. On the edge of Main Street stood Maggie's Diner, a weathered little place with foggy windows and a hand-painted sign that had long since faded from red to rust. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of frying bacon, overbrewed coffee, and the metallic whisper of an old Otis Redding tune slipping from the jukebox in the corner. At this hour, close to 10 p.m., most of the booths were empty. An older man in a worn-out Carhartt jacket sat hunched over a bowl of chili, spoon clinking softly. Near the window, two retired truckers quietly nursed their coffee while playing checkers, barely speaking. And behind the counter, moving with the weariness of someone who'd done this too many nights in a row, was Lauren James. Lauren was 32, black, and raising a son, while also taking care of her diabetic mother. She had started working at Maggie's during her junior year of high school, and never left. The money wasn't good, but it was steady. And in a town like Granger, steady was more than most people had. Her brown apron was faded, her shoes worn down to the lining, but she still kept her back straight and her service polite. Every now and then, her smile would flicker like a flame in the wind, especially when she caught her own reflection in the greasy glass of the pie display. Tonight, she was trying to finish cleaning early. There was nothing unusual about the night, just the hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional clatter of a plate, and the whistle of wind outside. That changed when the front door swung open and a man stepped inside, rain dripping from the brim of his old ball cap. He moved with the deliberate weight of someone who'd spent decades not needing to prove anything. He wore a heavy leather coat and thick boots, and his face, though partly obscured by the cap and age, was unmistakable. Sylvester Stallone. Older, yes. Weathered by time, sure. But still every inch, the man America once watched climb the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art with raw defiance in his heart. He looked around, nodded to the room in general, and sat down at the far end of the counter. Lauren didn't flinch, or scream, or even ask for a selfie. She just walked over with a coffee pot and a calm expression. "Evenin'," she said. "Evenin'," he replied, voice like gravel soaked in honey. "Coffee, black, and that pie, the pecan one, still fresh?" "Always fresh," she said with a faint smile, pouring the coffee. He gave a small nod of appreciation, his eyes scanning the room again. Not like a tourist, but like a man who'd learned the hard way to watch his surroundings. As he sipped, Lauren placed the pie gently in front of him, and for a few minutes, it felt like a normal evening again. Then the front door slammed open hard enough to make the bell jangle like an alarm, and everything shifted. 5 men strode in, dragging the scent of motor oil, cigarettes, and something meaner behind them. Leather jackets, heavy boots, pale faces twisted in sneers. They didn't look around to take in the mood. They assumed they owned it already. At the front was Rick Dawson, a bulky man in his 50s, with a scar down his cheek and a hatred he never bothered to hide. His father used to own half the real estate in Granger before the downturn. Now Rick ruled in another way, by fear. He stomped up to the counter like it belonged to him. "Well, well," he said, flashing a grin that never reached his eyes. "Look who's still here. I figured you'd have learned your place by now, sweetheart." Lauren didn't blink. "Evening, Rick." "Evening, she says," he laughed, grabbing a sugar packet and tossing it at her feet. "That's cute. Where's my money, Lauren? Or do I have to start charging the interest?" One of his guys, skinny and twitchy, kicked over a napkin holder. "You always talk tough until it's time to pay." Lauren's jaw tightened. "This is a restaurant, not a bank, and definitely not your piggy bank." Rick leaned in, his breath a mix of whiskey and rot. "Don't get smart. You know how it works. We keep this place safe. You pay your dues. That's the arrangement." "There's no arrangement. Just you threatening people who can't fight back." His grin faded. "That attitude's gonna get you hurt." At that, Stallone raised his eyes. He'd been watching since the moment the door opened, but now he moved. Slowly, he stood and stepped away from the counter. "That's enough," he said. Rick turned toward him, half smirk, half snarl. "Excuse me. You heard me. Back off." One of the younger thugs stepped closer, squinting. "Wait a sec. Is that... No way, that's Rocky. That's him." Rick scoffed. "What, the old boxer? From the movies?" He turned back to Stallone and laughed. "Man, you're even older than I thought. This ain't Hollywood, Gramps. Nobody's gonna cut the scene and bring in a stunt double." Stallone didn't move. "I don't need one." Rick moved in closer. "You trying to be a hero?" "No," Stallone replied. "I'm just tired of watching cowards beat up people who've done nothing to deserve it." Rick reached toward Lauren again, slow and deliberate. The sound of Stallone's stool tipping over was the last thing anyone remembered before the first punch was thrown. It came fast, tight, and brutal, decades of discipline, distilled into a single motion. Stallone's fist caught Rick right in the jaw, sending him stumbling backward into the pie case. The glass cracked. The diner erupted. One of the men swung a pool cue. Stallone ducked and drove his elbow into the man's ribs. Another lunged from the side and managed to land a sloppy punch that caught Stallone just above the eye. Blood started to drip, but Stallone barely blinked. His movements weren't polished, like they once were, but every blow was earned, deliberate, heavy. A fist to the gut, a knee to the chest. The old boxer still remembered. Lauren stood frozen behind the counter, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. She whispered into the receiver, "They're attacking!" "Yes, it's Rick Dawson." And Stallone. Sylvester Stallone. He's fighting them off. Within minutes, the bikers were moaning on the floor. Stallone's lip was bleeding, his knuckles raw, and a deep cut above his eye was seeping slowly, but he stood tall. Rick groaned from the floor near the jukebox, his pride more broken than his jaw. The door burst open again, this time with sirens and badges. The police entered quickly, surveying the wreckage, overturned tables, broken glass, and 5 grown men laid out across the linoleum floor. An officer turned to Lauren. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I am now." And across the room, a teenage boy who'd hidden behind a booth the whole time stood up, phone in hand, video still recording. "I got it all," he said breathlessly. "Every second." Sylvester Stallone sat back down at the counter, picked up his now cold coffee, and said in that familiar voice, "Now that's a good cup of coffee." The sirens faded as the last of the bikers were hauled out in cuffs, heads bowed, pride shattered, and eyes darting between Stallone and the cracked linoleum beneath their boots. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, the wind outside carrying the scent of fresh earth and cold metal. While inside Maggie's diner, time seemed to hold its breath. The place was a mess. Chairs overturned, salt shakers smashed, pieces of the jukebox casing still scattered across the floor, where Rick had crashed into it like a rag doll. The smell of blood mingled with grease and spilled coffee. Lauren stood behind the counter, hands trembling just enough to make the coffee pot clink against its burner. Her chest rose and fell in short, silent breaths, her eyes locked on the cracked tile where Rick had lain only moments earlier. It was over, at least for now. But the echo of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Stallone sat again, wiping his brow with a napkin. The gash over his right eye had stopped bleeding, though the bruising around it was already turning a deep red violet. He winced slightly as he reached for his coffee, now lukewarm and forgotten. Across from him, Lauren slowly exhaled and started to move. Instinct more than thought. Reaching for a mop, gathering a dustpan, returning to what her body knew best, cleaning up other people's messes. But this one wasn't just broken dishes and shattered glass. This one had cracked something deeper. She glanced at Stallone as he took a sip of his coffee and let out a quiet grunt, somewhere between satisfaction and exhaustion. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Yeah, I did." She set the mop aside, leaning her hip against the counter. "You don't even know me. Why step into something that wasn't your fight?" He didn't answer right away. He folded the napkin, placed it next to the mug, and looked out toward the door where Rick and his gang had left. His voice came low, tired, like a man who's answered this question more times than he cares to count. "Because I've seen too many people look away when someone needed help. Because I've been the guy nobody stood up for. And because sometimes it only takes one person to say no." Lauren stared at him, the words resting heavy in the space between them. Her jaw tightened. "You know this town, don't you?" she asked. "Maybe not this diner, but this kind of place. Places where people like me are supposed to keep our heads down and mouths shut. Where fear's just part of the menu." He gave a nod. "Yeah, I know this place." Before either of them could speak again, the door creaked open, and a couple of locals peeked inside. One was the checker-playing trucker from earlier, his white beard damp from the mist outside. The other, a middle-aged woman in scrubs, likely just off her hospital shift, stood frozen in the entryway until her eyes landed on Stallone. She clutched her purse like a lifeline. "Is it safe?" she asked. Lauren gave a quick nod. "They're gone." The woman stepped in cautiously, her eyes still flicking around the room, noting the wreckage, the blood. "I saw the video," she said. "It's already online. Somebody posted it not even 10 minutes ago. Folks are talking. Some are saying that was the best damn thing they've seen in years." The trucker stepped closer to Stallone, hand extended. "Hell of a thing you did, son." Nobody stood up to Rick in a long time. Not since his daddy passed and he started running wild. Stallone took the man's hand and gave it a firm shake. Sometimes people like him need to be reminded they're not invincible. The woman in scrubs nodded. It wasn't just about the fight, though. It was what it meant. The look on his face when you didn't back down. That's the part folks are remembering. Stallone said nothing. He wasn't interested in going viral. He'd had his share of headlines. But there was something in the way they looked at him. Not like a movie star, but like someone who'd woken something up in them. Lauren moved from behind the counter and started uprighting chairs, placing salt shakers back on tables, sweeping up bits of broken crockery. She moved with a different energy now. Not rushed, not fearful, but deliberate, focused, determined. Stallone watched her for a while before pushing himself up from his stool and walking over to where she was gathering napkins. "Let me help." She raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure you've done enough." "Still," he said, bending slowly to pick up a shattered plate, "seems only fair." They worked side by side for a while in silence. Outside, the rain lightened, and more locals started peeking in. One young man entered with a phone still recording in his hand. "Hey," he said, slightly breathless. "That video, it's blowing up. Already hit 20,000 views. Local news wants to know who you are." He looked at Stallone, almost shy. "You think we should, keep it up? Post it everywhere?" Lauren hesitated, then looked around the diner. The broken walls, the cautious hope in people's eyes, the fact that Rick and his gang were no longer here. "Yes," she said finally. "Let people see. Let them see what happens when someone says enough." The young man grinned. "Consider it done." By now, the diner was half full again. People weren't ordering food yet, just sitting, talking, whispering about what had happened like it was something sacred. Stallone leaned back against the counter and rubbed his bruised knuckles, glancing at Lauren. "You know this isn't over, right?" She nodded. "Rick said he's got people." "Yeah," Stallone replied, "and some of them might be dumb enough to come back." "You worried?" she asked. "For you?" He shook his head. "I'm old, not stupid. But you've got a community now that just saw what standing up looks like. They're not gonna forget that." She looked around the room. People who'd once looked past her were now looking to her, not out of pity, but respect. A few minutes later, a sheriff's deputy walked in. He was younger, maybe 30, clean-cut, with a badge that still had a bit of shine. He approached Lauren and handed her a business card. "Sheriff Daniels asked me to stop by. He saw the footage. Said to let you know. We're watching Rick's crew. They won't be back tonight. Maybe not for a long while. And if they are, you call. We'll be here." Lauren took the card and held it between her fingers, the weight of it sinking in. For years, calling the police never felt like an option. Now, someone had come to her first. As the deputy left, Stallone grabbed a fresh cup of coffee and sat down again, groaning a little as he lowered himself into the seat. Lauren brought over a fresh slice of pie, on the house. He looked at it, then at her, and gave a tired smile. "This what victory tastes like?" she laughed. "Number. That's just damn good pie." He took a bite and closed his eyes. "Still warm. That's the best part." "No," she said, wiping down the counter with a clean rag. "The best part is that I'm not scared anymore." Outside, the rain finally stopped, and for the first time in what felt like years, Granger felt like a town that might just wake up tomorrow a little braver than it was the day before. The morning after didn't come with fireworks or newspaper headlines. It came with a gray sky over Granger, the kind of sky that didn't promise sun, but didn't threaten rain either. It came with tired feet stepping back into Maggie's diner at 6 a.m., and the buzz of fluorescent lights flickering back to life. Lauren unlocked the front door with a stiffness in her shoulders that wasn't just from the bruises or the sleepless night. It was the weight of everything that had shifted. The diner still smelled like grease and coffee, but there was something new in the air, too. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something closer to dignity. The damage from the fight had mostly been cleaned. A few tables still leaned awkwardly, and the jukebox in the corner now displayed a jagged crack down its chrome panel like a scar from battle. But the place was open again, and this time it felt different. By 6:45, the first customer walked in, a man named Walter, who'd been eating breakfast at Maggie's for 2 decades and rarely said more than a grunt. Today, he brought flowers. Nothing fancy, just daisies from the gas station wrapped in paper towel. He placed them on the counter and nodded. "For standing up," he mumbled. Lauren took them without a word, her throat suddenly tight. Then came Cheryl from the post office, a mother of 4 who'd been scared of Rick's gang for years. She brought cinnamon rolls. Then 2 high school seniors who just wanted a selfie with Lauren and asked if the pie from the Rocky Diner was real. The town was waking up. Meanwhile, across that same counter, Stallone sat in his usual seat, hands curled around a cup of fresh black coffee. His right eye was still swollen, and the bandage above his brow had been changed, but he moved easier today. Less pain, more thought. He watched everything quietly, the smiles, the cautious laughter, the cautious hope that now crept into every conversation. When Lauren finally took a break and leaned on the counter across from him, he smiled just a little. "You're famous now." She rolled her eyes. "Please, if I had known a viral video would take down the worst gang in town, I'd have thrown pie at Rick years ago." "You didn't need to throw pie," Stallone said, sipping his coffee. "You just needed to stop running." Lauren grew serious. "You think they'll come back?" "Probably," he said, "but it won't be the same. You're not the same. And this town's not sleeping anymore." As they spoke, a black SUV pulled up outside, and 2 men in suits stepped out. One was the sheriff, Sheriff Daniels, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and a quiet way of walking. The other was a state investigator. They entered the diner without posturing, nodding respectfully to everyone, then approached Lauren and Stallone. "Morning," Daniels said, voice calm. "We've got charges ready on Rick Dawson and his crew. Assault, extortion, intimidation, and a few others. Thanks to that video, we've even had folks from other towns come forward. Seems they've been pulling this routine up and down the county line for years." Lauren looked surprised. "They went to other towns?" "Yeah," Daniels nodded. "But most folks were too scared to say anything. Until now." The investigator added, "We're working on making the charges federal. Interstate intimidation, organized harassment, hate crimes. That footage, it's not just viral, it's evidence." Lauren blinked, as if trying to process that her little act of standing up had snowballed into something so much bigger. Stallone only nodded slowly, as if it confirmed what he already knew deep down, that when one person stands up, others will find their feet too. The 2 men left a folder of paperwork with Lauren, shook Stallone's hand, and stepped out, leaving behind the scent of suits and certainty. By noon, reporters had started calling, local stations, then national ones. Some wanted an interview with the mystery waitress. Others were chasing the real-life Rocky story. Lauren ignored most of them. This wasn't about attention. It wasn't about going viral. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken slowly, piece by piece, over the years, her safety, her voice, her belonging. She wasn't just the girl who served coffee. Not anymore. The rest of the day passed in a quiet current of conversation. People stayed longer, talked more. They reminisced about when Granger used to feel safe, when families didn't keep pepper spray in glove compartments or tell their daughters to avoid downtown after dark. One older woman leaned over and whispered to Lauren, "My husband used to run the feed store back when Rick's daddy was still alive. He'd be proud of what you did. Real proud." Lauren nodded, unsure how to carry the weight of so many years on her shoulders, but she smiled anyway. Later that afternoon, as the clouds cleared and sunlight began to trickle through the dusty windows, Stallone stood up, stretching his back with a groan. Lauren walked over, wiping her hands on a towel. "You heading out?" He nodded. "Got a long drive ahead." "Where to?" she asked. "Don't know yet," he replied. "Someplace that needs it." She looked at him, searching for something in his expression. "You always do this? Walk into trouble and fix it?" He gave a dry chuckle. "Number just tired of pretending I can't." She hesitated, then held out her hand. He took it. Her grip was strong. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for me. For all of us." He looked around the diner, the half-repaired jukebox, the patched-up window where the neon sign now flickered a little brighter. "You did most of it yourself," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you." He walked to the door, pushed it open, and paused. Rain had stopped. The street outside gleamed in the sunlight. He turned back one last time. "Next time someone like Rick walks in, you won't need me." She smiled. "I know." He nodded, tipped his cap, and disappeared into the light. That evening, Maggie's diner stayed open later than usual. No one seemed in a rush to leave. There was laughter again, the kind that came from relief, and children peeked in through the windows asking if the boxer guy was still around. Lauren served burgers with a bounce in her step and spoke with the kind of voice that didn't flinch anymore. When she passed by the cracked jukebox, she reached out, gave it a gentle knock, and watched it light up again, Otis Redding's voice filling the diner just like the night before. Except this time, nobody felt afraid. Outside, the town of Granger breathed easier. No, it wasn't perfect. Rick might have had friends. The world didn't change overnight. But something had shifted. Not just in the diner, not just in Lauren, but in everyone who saw what happened and decided they didn't want to live afraid anymore. Stallone had walked in a stranger. He left a symbol. But the real victory was this. The fight didn't just end with a punch. It began with a community remembering who they were before fear took hold. And somewhere, down a quiet road bathed in sunlight, an old Dodge pickup disappeared into the distance, radio off, window cracked, and one man behind the wheel who wasn't done fighting for places that forgot how to stand. Not yet. Maybe not ever.